The radio crackled at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Ramstein Air Base like a blade through bone. Tower, this is Ghost 77 requesting immediate priority landing. Medical emergency aboard. The voice was steady, professional, but something underneath made Senior Controller Markus Volkov pause mid-sip of his coffee. 23 years of directing traffic in NATO's busiest airspace, and he'd never heard that particular call sign. Ghost 77 Ramstein Tower, state your aircraft type and approach vector. Volkov's fingers hovered over his keyboard, ready to log the incoming flight. The pause stretched longer than protocol allowed. Outside the tower windows, Germany's countryside lay shrouded in morning mist, peaceful and deceptively quiet. Tower, Ghost 77 inbound from bearing 090, altitude Angels 15, requesting vectors for immediate approach runway 24. Still no aircraft identification. Volkov frowned, glancing at his supervisor, Colonel Patricia Hayes, who had materialized beside his station with the silent efficiency that had earned her 3 stars and countless enemies. "Run the call sign," Hayes murmured, her Boston accent cutting through the control room's ambient hum. Volkov's search came back empty. No Ghost 77 in any NATO database. No flight plan filed. No transponder code assigned. Yet somehow this phantom aircraft was requesting priority landing at one of Europe's most secure military installations. The mystery deepened when radar operator Lisa Chen spoke up from her station across the room. "Colonel, I'm showing nothing on scope at bearing 090. Clear skis for 200 nautical miles." Hayes felt ice form in her stomach. In her 30-year career, she'd seen radar ghosts, system glitches, and elaborate training scenarios. This felt different. This felt real. "Ghost 77, confirm your position and altitude. We show no traffic at your reported location." Volkov's voice carried a new edge. The response came immediately, calm as Arctic water. "Tower, Ghost 77 is 15 miles southeast, descending through 12,000. You should have visual in approximately 4 minutes. And Tower," the pause held weight, "tell Colonel Hayes that Valkyrie sends her regards." Hayes went pale. Valkyrie. A call sign she hadn't heard in 8 years, not since the classified operation that had cost them 3 good pilots and nearly sparked an international incident. A mission so black it didn't officially exist, carried out by a pilot whose service record had been sealed at levels requiring presidential clearance. She'd assumed Valkyrie was dead, like everyone else who'd known about Operation Nightfall. But dead pilots don't radio for emergency landings. Dead pilots don't know her current rank and station. And dead pilots certainly don't appear on approach vectors that should be impossible to navigate without proper clearance codes. Hayes grabbed her secure phone, speed dialing a number she'd memorized but hoped never to use. As it rang, she watched the eastern horizon, waiting for an aircraft that shouldn't exist, piloted by a ghost who just shattered 8 years of carefully constructed fiction. The dawn was about to break, and with it, everything Hayes thought she knew about the war they were fighting. Colonel Hayes' secure line connected on the second ring. "Pentagon, Deputy Director Castellanos." The voice belonged to Maria Castellanos, a woman whose job title was deliberately vague and whose actual responsibilities could topple governments. Hayes had worked with her exactly once during Nightfall and had spent the subsequent 8 years hoping their paths would never cross again. "Maria, it's Patricia Hayes at Ramstein. We have a situation." Hayes kept her voice level, professional, but her free hand trembled slightly as she gripped the observation deck railing. Below, emergency crews were already positioning themselves along runway 24, though they had no idea what they were preparing for. "How secure is this line?" Castellanos asked immediately. Through the background noise, Hayes could hear the deputy director moving, probably to a SCIF room. At the Pentagon, 9:47 hours meant the building was already humming with the day's classified briefings and strategic planning sessions. Encrypted and scrambled, Maria, Valkyrie just requested emergency landing clearance. The silence stretched so long Hayes wondered if the connection had dropped. When Castellanos finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who just watched their carefully constructed world shift on its axis. That's impossible. Valkyrie died in Syria 8 years ago. We have satellite imagery of her F-22 going down. We recovered wreckage. But even as she said it, Castellanos was already pulling up files that hadn't been accessed since 2017. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, bringing up mission reports, casualty assessments, and burial records that had been sealed under compartmentalized access protocols. Well, someone with her voice and her knowledge of classified operations is requesting permission to land a ghost aircraft at my base. Someone who knows your deputy director, someone who knows I'm stationed here, and someone who's currently approaching on an impossible vector with no radar signature. Hayes watched her radar operator shake his head in frustrated confusion, adjusting settings and running diagnostics on equipment that had worked flawlessly for months. Castellanos was quiet for nearly 30 seconds, and Hayes could almost hear the mental calculations, the risk assessments, the political implications cascading through one of the Pentagon's sharpest strategic minds. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected global stability. Patricia, I need you to grant that landing clearance, but I want a full security lockdown the moment that aircraft touches down. No one approaches until I have a team on site. No one photographs anything. No one talks to anyone. This conversation never happened until I say otherwise. The deputy director paused, and when she continued, her voice held a note Hayes had never heard before, genuine uncertainty. And Patricia, if that really is Valkyrie, then everything we thought we knew about Nightfall was wrong, which means we might have bigger problems than one ghost pilot. Hayes felt the familiar weight of classified operations settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She'd spent 8 years trying to forget Syria, trying to forget the 3 body bags that had come home from a mission that officially never existed, trying to forget the pilot who'd volunteered for a suicide run because someone had to, and she'd been the only one with the skills to pull it off. Understood. I'll handle the base lockdown personally. Hayes disconnected and immediately began issuing orders that would transform Ramstein into a fortress within the next 10 minutes. But as she coordinated security protocols and emergency procedures, one question gnawed at her. If Valkyrie had survived Syria, why had she stayed dead for 8 years? The answer, she suspected, was going to change everything they thought they knew about the war they were fighting. At 30,000 feet above the Swiss Alps, Major Kestrel Valkyrie, Thorne banked her aircraft through a turn that would have been impossible in any conventional fighter. Her hands moved across controls that didn't exist in any military manual managing systems that had been classified beyond black budget programs. The medical emergency she'd reported was genuine, though not in the way Ramstein Tower assumed. Blood seeped through the pressure bandage wrapped around her left shoulder, a souvenir from the extraction that had gone sideways 12 hours earlier in a place that didn't officially exist. She'd been operating alone for so long that the sound of her own voice on the radio felt strange, almost foreign. 8 years of silence, 8 years of missions that never appeared in any after-action report, 8 years of being a ghost in service to a war that had no front lines and no rules of engagement. Her aircraft, designated only as Project Mirage in the deepest Pentagon files, represented technology that was 15 years ahead of anything currently deployed. Stealth capabilities that made the F-22 look like a World War II bomber, weapons systems that could engage targets the human eye couldn't see, and most importantly, the ability to operate completely independently for months at a time. She'd become the perfect weapon for a conflict that couldn't officially exist. The irony wasn't lost on her. 8 years ago, she'd volunteered for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission because it was the right thing to do. 3 of her squadron mates had already died trying to complete Operation Nightfall, and someone had to finish what they'd started. The mission succeeded, but the cost was her identity, her life, her connection to everything she'd once been. Major Kestrel Thorne had died over Syria, and Valkyrie had been born from the ashes. But now the game was changing. The intelligence she'd gathered over the past 8 years painted a picture that terrified even her, someone who'd spent nearly a decade operating in the shadows of global conflict. The enemy they'd been fighting wasn't what it appeared to be. The mission in Syria hadn't been about stopping a weapons transfer or eliminating a terrorist cell. It had been about stopping something far worse, something that was now moving again. She needed help, which meant breaking 8 years of radio silence and trusting people who'd already mourned her death. The shoulder wound was manageable, but the intel she carried would require resources she couldn't access alone. Ramstein was the only NATO facility with the security clearance and technical capabilities necessary for what came next. Her heads-up display showed German airspace approaching. In 15 minutes, she'd either be landing at a friendly base or starting World War III. The distinction would depend entirely on whether Colonel Hayes still trusted the woman she'd once been, before the missions that couldn't be discussed and the operations that didn't exist. Before she'd become something that walked the line between ally and weapon, between human and ghost. Valkyrie adjusted her approach vector and opened the encrypted channel she'd been monitoring for 8 years, the frequency that connected her to the people fighting a war the world didn't know existed. All stations, this is Valkyrie. I'm coming home, and I'm bringing answers you're not going to like. The response came immediately, multiple voices cutting across each other, call signs she recognized from missions that had shaped the last decade of global politics. They'd been waiting for her, she realized. They'd known she was alive. Which meant the real question was, what else did they know? Colonel Hayes stood on the observation deck, binoculars focused on the eastern horizon when she first saw it. Not an aircraft exactly, but a distortion in the morning sky, like heat shimmer rising from summer asphalt. The shape was wrong, too sleek, too angular, defying conventional aerodynamics in ways that made her engineering background recoil. Whatever Valkyrie was flying, it hadn't rolled off any production line in existence. "Jesus Christ," whispered Master Sergeant Rodriguez from behind her. He'd been tracking military aircraft for 15 years, had seen every prototype and experimental platform in NATO's inventory. This was something else entirely. "Colonel, what the hell is that thing?" The aircraft, if it could be called that, settled into its approach with impossible grace. No engine noise reached the tower, no exhaust signature appeared on thermal imaging, no electromagnetic emissions registered on their most sensitive equipment. It simply existed in three-dimensional space like a violation of physics, sliding through the air as if friction were optional. Hayes' secure phone buzzed. "Castellanos again. Patricia, I have a Pentagon tech team spinning up for immediate deployment to your location. They'll be airborne in 20 minutes. The deputy director's voice carried new urgency. "I've been digging deeper into Nightfall, and there are discrepancies in the mission reports. Significant ones." "What kind of discrepancies?" Hayes kept her binoculars trained on the approaching aircraft, watching it descend through what should have been impossible flight profiles. No conventional aircraft could maintain stability at those angles, with that degree of maneuverability. The kind that suggests Operation Nightfall wasn't a counterterrorism mission. The kind that suggests we were lied to about what we were really fighting. Castellanos paused, and Hayes could hear papers rustling in the background. "Patricia, I need you to understand something. If that really is Valkyrie, she's been operating under deep cover for 8 years. The missions she's been flying, the intelligence she's been gathering, it's all been in service of something we weren't briefed on." The implications hit Hayes like a physical blow. Deep cover meant deniable operations. It meant missions that couldn't be acknowledged, couldn't be supported, couldn't be traced back to official policy. It meant 8 years of a decorated pilot risking everything for objectives that existed beyond congressional oversight or public accountability. "Maria, are you telling me she's been fighting a shadow war?" Hayes watched the aircraft execute a final turn that violated three separate laws of physics. Her radar operator had given up trying to track it and was staring out the window like everyone else, his instruments useless against technology that shouldn't exist. I'm telling you, she might be the only reason we're still having this conversation. Castellano's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The intelligence suggests that what happened in Syria 8 years ago wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning, and Valkyrie has been holding the line ever since. The aircraft touched down with absolute silence, its landing gear extending from panels that hadn't been visible moments before. It rolled to a stop exactly where Hayes had positioned the emergency crews, as if the pilot had been monitoring their preparations throughout the approach. The canopy opened with a soft hiss, and a figure in a flight suit climbed out with movements that suggested injury but maintained dignity. Even at distance, Hayes recognized the bearing, the way she moved, the careful control that marked someone accustomed to operating under extreme stress. 8 years older, 8 years harder, but unmistakably the pilot who'd volunteered for what they'd all assumed was certain death. Major Kestrel Thorne had come home, but the woman walking across the tarmac toward the base operations building wasn't the same person who'd disappeared over Syria. This was someone who'd spent 8 years fighting alone, carrying secrets that could reshape their understanding of modern warfare. Hayes descended from the observation deck, her mind already cataloging the security protocols necessary to contain what was about to become the most classified debriefing in NATO history. Valkyrie's first steps on solid ground in 3 days sent jolts of pain through her wounded shoulder, but she maintained the steady pace that had carried her through 8 years of operations no one could know about. The emergency crews held their positions, professional enough to follow orders but curious enough to stare at aircraft that challenged their understanding of what was possible. She could feel the weight of their attention, the questions building behind carefully disciplined expressions. These were good people, dedicated to keeping NATO's operations running smoothly, but they were about to become part of something that would test their security clearances and their ability to keep secrets. The less they knew, the safer they'd be. Colonel Hayes emerged from the base operations building, flanked by security personnel, whose posture suggested they'd been briefed on protocols that existed for situations beyond normal operational parameters. 8 years had changed Patricia Hayes, added lines around her eyes and gray to her hair, but her stride still carried the authority that had made her one of the most respected officers in the European theater. Major Thorne. Hayes' voice was carefully neutral, the tone of someone managing a situation that could explode in multiple directions depending on how the next few minutes unfolded. I think we need to have a conversation. Colonel. Valkyrie stopped 3 paces away, close enough for normal military courtesy but far enough to maintain tactical awareness. Old habits from 8 years of operating alone, where trust was earned in increments and mistakes were usually fatal. Thank you for granting landing clearance. I know this isn't standard protocol. Hayes studied her face, looking for the pilot she'd known 8 years ago beneath the weathered features of someone who'd spent too much time in places where survival depended on constant vigilance. Major, as far as official records are concerned, you died in Syria 8 years ago. We held a memorial service. Your family was notified. Your aircraft was listed as destroyed in action. The reports were accurate. Valkyrie's response carried weight that suggested layers of meaning Hayes wasn't cleared to understand. Major Kestrel Thorne died over Syria. What's been operating since then is something else entirely. The admission hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Hayes to confront possibilities that existed beyond normal military structure. Deep cover operations that lasted years, missions that required complete separation from official identity, objectives that superseded conventional chain of command. She'd heard rumors of such programs, whispers in Pentagon corridors about assets that operated in the spaces between official policy and deniable necessity. "Then who am I talking to?" Hayes asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Someone who's been fighting a war you didn't know existed, using resources you weren't cleared to know about, against an enemy that's been playing a longer game than anyone realized." Valkyrie's eyes swept the base perimeter, automatically cataloging security positions and potential threats. 8 years of paranoia weren't easily set aside. Someone who's run out of time to fight alone. Hayes felt the familiar weight of classified operations settling around them like a net. Whatever Valkyrie had been doing for 8 years, whatever she'd learned, whatever she'd seen, it was about to become Hayes' responsibility to contain and manage. The Pentagon team Castellanos was sending would handle the technical aspects, but the immediate security concerns fell to her. "We need to get you to a secure location for debriefing, medical attention for that shoulder, and Major," Hayes paused, choosing her words carefully, "whatever you've been carrying alone for 8 years, you're not alone anymore." For the first time since landing, Valkyrie's expression shifted slightly, revealing glimpses of the pilot Hayes had known before Syria, before the missions that had required her to disappear from the world of the living. The secure medical facility beneath Ramstein's main hospital had been designed for scenarios that planners hoped would never occur. Chemical weapons exposure, biological contamination, psychological breakdown of personnel carrying state secrets too dangerous for normal psychiatric care. Dr. Elena Vasquez had overseen the facility for 6 years, treating everything from radiation poisoning to combat stress reactions that couldn't be discussed in normal military medical channels. But she'd never treated a patient who'd been officially dead for 8 years. "The shoulder wound is recent, maybe 8 to 10 hours old." Dr. Vasquez worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning and rebandaging the injury while monitoring vitals that suggested someone operating under extreme stress for an extended period. "High-velocity fragment, probably shrapnel from an explosive device. You were lucky. A few inches lower and it would have punctured your lung." Valkyrie remained still during the examination, her eyes fixed on the ceiling but clearly listening to everything around her. 8 years of operating alone had left her hypervigilant, constantly processing environmental data for potential threats. Even in the secure medical facility, she maintained the alertness of someone accustomed to being hunted. "Doctor, how long since you've had proper rest?" Dr. Vasquez asked, nodding the telltale signs of chronic sleep deprivation and stress-induced muscle tension. "Your cortisol levels suggest you've been operating in fight-or-flight mode for weeks, possibly months." "Rest is a luxury I couldn't afford." Valkyrie's response was matter-of-fact, without self-pity or complaint. "When you're the only person who knows something critical, sleep becomes secondary to survival." Colonel Hayes entered the medical bay accompanied by 2 individuals whose appearance immediately marked them as Pentagon intelligence analysts. The woman wore a business suit that managed to look professional despite the early hour and hasty travel arrangements. The man carried himself with the controlled alertness of someone accustomed to dealing with information that could destabilize governments. "Major Thorne, this is Deputy Director Maria Castellano and Senior Analyst James Kovach. They've been cleared for compartmentalized access to whatever intelligence you've been gathering." Hayes' introduction carried the weight of someone who understood they were about to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Castellano stepped forward, her expression revealing someone who'd spent the flight from Washington reviewing files that had challenged everything she thought she knew about recent military operations. "Major, I need to understand what happened in Syria 8 years ago. The real mission, not the cover story we've been carrying in official records." Valkyrie met her eyes directly, the first time since landing that she'd shown complete focus on another person. Syria was never about stopping weapons transfers or eliminating terrorist cells. It was about preventing the deployment of technology that would have made conventional warfare obsolete overnight. We were sent to stop something that threatened the basic assumptions of modern military strategy. The admission hit the room like a physical force. Kovac pulled out a secure tablet, his fingers already moving across classified databases as he cross-referenced information that had been compartmentalized beyond normal intelligence channels. 8 years of carefully constructed narratives were about to collapse under the weight of truth. "What kind of technology?" Castellanos asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the answer would reshape their understanding of global security threats. "Autonomous weapons systems powered by artificial intelligence that could learn, adapt, and operate independently for indefinite periods. Not drones or remotely piloted vehicles, but truly autonomous hunters that could identify, track, and eliminate targets without human oversight." Valkyrie paused, letting the implications settle. "The mission was successful. We prevented deployment, but we didn't destroy the technology. We just forced it underground." Hayes felt ice form in her stomach. Autonomous weapons had been the subject of international treaties and ethical debates for years, but always in theoretical terms. The idea that such systems had been operational 8 years ago, that a covert mission had been necessary to prevent their deployment, suggested a level of technological development that existed far beyond public knowledge. "Major," Kovac said quietly, "are you telling us that your 8 years of deep cover operations have been tracking this technology?" Valkyrie's nod carried the weight of someone who'd spent nearly a decade fighting an enemy that evolved faster than conventional military responses could adapt. The secure briefing room 3 levels beneath Ramstein's command center had been constructed to contain conversations that could reshape global politics. Electromagnetic shielding prevented any electronic surveillance. Acoustic dampening eliminated the possibility of audio monitoring, and access required biometric confirmation from personnel cleared for information that existed beyond normal security classifications. Valkyrie stood before a digital display that showed a map of the world marked with dozens of red indicators, each representing intelligence she'd gathered during 8 years of operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged. Her wounded shoulder was properly treated and secured, but fatigue was beginning to show in the careful way she moved, the precise control of someone operating on reserves they couldn't afford to exhaust. "This is what I've been tracking," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 8 years gathering intelligence that hadn't been filtered through committee oversight or political considerations. Autonomous weapons development didn't stop after Syria. It went underground, distributed across multiple programs that appeared unconnected, but were actually part of a coordinated effort to deploy the technology we prevented 8 years ago. Castellanos studied the display, her expression revealing someone who'd spent a career managing classified programs but had never seen intelligence gathered through methods this unorthodox. "Major, how did you gather this information? What resources were available for operations this extensive?" "Project Mirage," Valkyrie replied, gesturing toward the aircraft visible through the briefing room's reinforced windows. Experimental technology that allowed for extended independent operations. Stealth capabilities that made conventional surveillance impossible to detect. Weapons systems that could engage threats without revealing my position. And most importantly, the ability to operate for months without returning to base for resupply or maintenance. Kovac looked up from his tablet, where he'd been cross-referencing the intelligence markers with known terrorist activities, weapons transfers, and unexplained military incidents from the past 8 years. "Major, according to your data, these autonomous weapons programs have been active across 4 continents. The coordination required suggests state-level resources and planning." "Not state-level," Valkyrie corrected. "Something beyond state-level. The programs I've been tracking operate across national boundaries, using resources from multiple governments without any single government having complete knowledge of the overall objective. It's coordination that transcends traditional geopolitical structures." The implications were staggering. Colonel Hayes had spent her career understanding threats in terms of conventional military doctrine, nation versus nation, ideology versus ideology, resource competition, and territorial disputes. The idea of a coordinated effort that operated beyond national sovereignty suggested conflict scenarios that existing military structure wasn't designed to address. "What's the current threat assessment?" Hayes asked, though she suspected the answer would require rethinking everything they assumed about modern warfare. Valkyrie manipulated the display, showing recent intelligence markers concentrated in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and North Africa. Active deployment is imminent. The technology has been perfected, manufactured, and distributed to forward positions. My estimate is that we have less than 72 hours before autonomous weapon systems become operational across multiple theaters simultaneously. The room fell silent as the timeline settled. 72 hours to prevent deployment of weapons that could make conventional military response obsolete. 72 hours to address a threat that had been developing for 8 years while operating beyond the awareness of official channels. Castellanos was already reaching for her secure phone, her mind calculating the political and logistical challenges of coordinating response to a threat that couldn't be officially acknowledged. "Major, what do you recommend for immediate action?" "We stop playing defense," Valkyrie replied, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd spent 8 years watching the enemy grow stronger while fighting alone. "We take the fight to them before they can deploy, and we do it with resources that exist beyond normal operational parameters." Hayes realized they were about to cross into territory that existed beyond her security clearance and her understanding of modern warfare. But they were also about to discover whether 8 years of impossible missions had prepared them for what came next. The Pentagon's Crisis Action Team had been activated exactly 4 times in the past decade, each occasion marking situations that threatened global stability at levels requiring immediate response from the highest levels of military and political leadership. At 13:47 hours Eastern Time, the secure conference room beneath the Pentagon's river entrance filled with personnel, whose combined security clearances represented access to America's most carefully guarded secrets. Secretary of Defense Jonathan Wright took his position at the head of the table, his expression revealing someone who'd been briefed on preliminary intelligence that challenged fundamental assumptions about current threat assessments. Flanking him were the Joint Chiefs, intelligence directors from agencies whose acronyms weren't publicly acknowledged, and secure video connections to NATO allies whose participation would be essential for what was being proposed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation that requires immediate attention and absolute discretion." Wright's opening statement carried the weight of someone who'd spent 3 hours reviewing intelligence that had fundamentally altered his understanding of modern warfare. 8 years ago, we conducted a classified operation in Syria that we believed had neutralized a significant technological threat. We were wrong. The secure displays around the room lit up with intelligence markers that Valkyrie had gathered during her 8 years of independent operations. Maps showing coordination patterns that transcended national boundaries, weapons development programs that had operated beyond official oversight, and deployment timelines that suggested imminent activation across multiple theaters. General Patricia Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward to study the data. "Mr. Secretary, this intelligence suggests coordination at levels that would require resources beyond any known state actor. Are we looking at a non-state threat with capabilities that rival major military powers?" "We're looking at something that operates beyond traditional categorization," Wright replied, his voice carrying the frustration of someone accustomed to dealing with threats that fit established paradigms. "The pilot who gathered this intelligence has been operating independently for 8 years, using experimental technology that exists beyond normal procurement channels. Her assessment is that We have less than 72 hours before deployment of autonomous weapons systems that could make conventional military response obsolete. Admiral Sarah Chen, Chief of Naval Operations, studied the deployment markers concentrated around strategic maritime choke points. Mr. Secretary, if these weapon systems achieve operational status, they could disrupt global shipping and communication networks simultaneously. Economic impact would be catastrophic before we could mount effective response. CIA Director Robert Castellanos, Maria's older brother and someone who'd spent his career managing operations that couldn't officially exist, pulled up additional intelligence that had been declassified for this briefing. The technology we're facing represents artificial intelligence that can learn, adapt, and operate independently for extended periods. Traditional countermeasures won't be effective against systems that can modify their tactics in real time. Wright turned to the secure video connection showing Colonel Hayes at Ramstein. "Colonel, what's the operational status of our primary intelligence asset?" Hayes appeared on screen, her expression revealing someone who'd spent the past 6 hours coordinating security protocols for information that existed beyond normal classification levels. "Mr. Secretary, Major Thorne is prepared for immediate deployment. Her aircraft represents technology that matches or exceeds the capabilities of the systems we're facing. However, she's been operating alone for 8 years. Success will require coordinated support that we've never attempted before." The admission hung in the air like a challenge. They were about to authorize operations using experimental technology against threats that transcended conventional military structure, coordinated by a pilot who'd been officially dead for 8 years. The political and operational risks were enormous, but the alternative was allowing deployment of weapons that could reshape the global balance of power overnight. Secretary Wright looked around the table, reading the expressions of people who dedicated their careers to protecting national security through conventional means. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to authorize operations that exist beyond normal parameters. The mission will be classified at levels requiring special access protocols. Are we in agreement that immediate action is necessary?" The unanimous response marked the beginning of the most ambitious covert operation in modern military history. Major Kestrel Valkyrie, Thorne stood in Ramstein's secure hangar, running pre-flight checks on an aircraft that represented 15 years of technological development beyond anything currently operational. The Project Mirage platform had been her home, her weapon, and her lifeline for 8 years of missions that couldn't be acknowledged. Now it would serve as the primary asset for an operation that could prevent global catastrophe or trigger the conflict it was designed to avoid. The hangar had been cleared of all personnel except those with special access clearance. Even the maintenance crews had been replaced with Pentagon technical specialists who'd been briefed on systems that existed in no official manual. The aircraft itself defied conventional description. Angular surfaces that seemed to bend light around them, propulsion systems that produced no visible exhaust, weapons pods that could deploy ordnance with precision that rendered traditional targeting obsolete. Colonel Hayes approached, carrying a mission folder that contained coordinates, timelines, and objectives that had been classified beyond normal operational security. "Major, your primary targets are manufacturing facilities in 3 locations: Eastern Ukraine, North Korea, and Libya. Intelligence suggests these are the final assembly points for autonomous weapons systems. Destruction of these facilities will prevent deployment, but you'll be operating without backup in territory controlled by hostile forces." Valkyrie accepted the folder, though she'd already memorized the intelligence during her briefing with Pentagon analysts. 8 years of independent operations had taught her to prepare for scenarios that planners couldn't anticipate, to carry contingencies for situations that existed beyond normal tactical doctrine. Time frame for mission completion: 60 hours from takeoff. The autonomous systems are scheduled for activation in 72 hours, but political considerations require that we maintain plausible deniability. This mission never happened, these targets were never struck, and you were never there. Hayes paused, choosing her words carefully. Major, if something goes wrong, if you're captured or compromised, official channels will deny knowledge of your existence. You'll be completely on your own. The statement carried weight they both understood. Deep cover operations required absolute commitment to objectives that transcended personal survival. 8 years ago, Valkyrie had volunteered for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission because someone had to complete the objective. Now she was volunteering again, for stakes that were arguably higher. Understood, Colonel, but there's something else we need to discuss. Valkyrie's expression shifted, revealing concern that went beyond mission parameters. The intelligence I've gathered suggests coordination at levels that transcend the targets we're striking. Destroying these facilities will prevent immediate deployment, but it won't eliminate the threat. Someone is orchestrating this from a position we haven't identified. Hayes felt ice form in her stomach. The mission they were authorizing would commit American military assets to offensive operations against targets in 3 different countries, using experimental technology that could trigger international incidents if discovered. But if Valkyrie was correct, if the threat extended beyond the immediate targets, they were fighting symptoms rather than addressing the actual disease. Major, what are you recommending? I complete the primary mission, but I maintain operational flexibility to pursue the coordination center if intelligence becomes available. The Project Mirage platform is designed for extended independent operations. I can remain deployed indefinitely if necessary to track the source of this threat. Valkyrie's voice carried the conviction of someone who'd spent 8 years understanding that real security required commitment beyond normal operational parameters. Hayes realized they were authorizing not just a mission, but a continuation of the shadow war that Valkyrie had been fighting alone for 8 years. The difference was that now, finally, she wouldn't be completely alone. Authorization granted, Major, but remember, you're not just representing American interests anymore. NATO allies are counting on mission success. Failure could destabilize the entire alliance structure. Valkyrie nodded, already moving toward her aircraft with the purposeful stride of someone who'd spent 8 years preparing for exactly this moment. At 4:30 hours local time, Project Mirage lifted off from Ramstein Air Base with the silence that had made it legendary among the handful of people cleared to know it existed. No engine noise reached the control tower. No exhaust signature appeared on thermal imaging. No electromagnetic emissions registered on the most sensitive detection equipment. The aircraft simply transitioned from ground to air with the impossible grace that had allowed it to operate undetected for 8 years. Valkyrie banked east toward the first target, her route taking her through airspace that belonged to multiple nations but would show no record of her passage. The mission timeline was aggressive. 3 targets across 2 continents, each requiring precision strikes that would eliminate manufacturing capability without creating casualties that could trigger international retaliation. She'd done impossible things before, but never with stakes this high. The secure communication system crackled to life as she reached cruising altitude. Valkyrie, this is Olympus Control. You are cleared for autonomous operation. Mission parameters remain as briefed. The voice belonged to Colonel Hayes, speaking from the command center that had been established beneath Ramstein specifically for this operation. Olympus Control, Valkyrie copies, proceeding to target Alpha on schedule. She adjusted her heading toward coordinates in eastern Ukraine, where intelligence indicated the primary autonomous weapons assembly facility was approaching final production phases. The facility had been disguised as an agricultural processing plant, but satellite imagery showed electromagnetic signatures consistent with advanced manufacturing systems. Her heads-up display painted a tactical picture of the battlespace ahead. Air defense systems that wouldn't detect her approach, patrol patterns that she could avoid through terrain masking, and structural analysis of the target that would allow precision strikes with minimal collateral damage. But underlying the tactical data was intelligence that suggested something far more complex than a simple manufacturing facility. The coordination patterns she tracked for 8 years indicated that these facilities weren't independent operations. They were components of a distributed system designed to survive conventional military response through redundancy and geographic dispersion. Destroying them would delay deployment, but wouldn't eliminate the underlying capability unless she could identify and neutralize the coordination center. Her secure communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. Pentagon intelligence had intercepted communications, suggesting that her mission had been anticipated. The enemy knew she was coming, which meant they'd been monitoring classified communications or had intelligence sources within NATO command structure. Either possibility suggested penetration at levels that threatened the basic security assumptions of modern military.